let's kick this off. So welcome to what we call ZEISS Conversations, here where we chat about all things cinematography. Today we have a special guest with us. He was DP for some of the scariest moments in horror to date, Mr. James Kniest. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Glad to have you. And of course, as always, on my left here is Anna Schmidt. She is in marketing in our LA office, and I'm Tony, Senior Marketing Manager here in New York, and we'll be hosting the conversation today. So, James, like we were talking about, there's a lot of things that you've been involved with, and kind of an interesting route that you, in your background of how you became to be a cinematographer from underwater through to gaffer to today. Can you give us kind of an idea of how you got here and how you decided to be a cinematographer?
Sure. It all started with me as a young person, as a kid. I was really enamored and interested in Jacques Cousteau documentaries, and this will date me, but the Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sorry. So I watched that incessantly as a kid. It was either that or NFL and nothing else. And and so I just was really interested in documenting animals and the wildlife and things like that. I was a bit idealistic back then too. I thought that maybe somehow I could help the animal kingdom by bringing awareness to the general public through image making and documentary movies. Um, so after having gone to college a little bit already and coming back home, I was really looking for a way to shift gears and get into the animal documentary kind of thing. I was especially enamored with underwater. I grew up on the water, in the water, under the water, and I my dad was golf buddies with a lead man, and he said, "Hey, you should meet my friend." And so I met him, and he said, "Oh yeah, you need to meet Pete Romano. He is the founder and president of Hydroflex." So I was fortunate enough to have a meeting with Pete, and he said, "You got to go to Brooks Institute and dive and learn underwater photography with Ernie Brooks." Brooks is no longer a school, but for a long time it was probably one of the better photography and then filmmaking schools located in Santa Barbara on the West Coast here. And it was really interesting. They had a boat with a film process. This is film days. They had a boat with a film processor on it, and Ernie was a very prolific underwater photographer and adventure person. And so part of the curriculum was we'd just go to sea on this boat, and we'd go to all kinds of different dive areas along California, and we would dive and shoot pictures and come up and process and learn. It's a little bit different now with digital. You can just view your image and make adjustments, but back then you had to kind of take mental notes or even written notes about your settings and come back and analyze the results and learn that way. So it was a little more cumbersome than it is now with digital, but it was nonetheless a great experience. So I started working as a underwater lighting person and a crew person and some underwater camera assisting. All the while I was still studying cinematography and commercial photography at Brooks. And in that, I really learned about light writing and painting with light. And I got really interested in that, and I really enjoyed it. It was very fun for me. And so and this was the film days again, so that school had really given me a deep foundation in chemistry and processing and film densities and also the physics of optics as well. So I started working as a still photography assistant in Santa Barbara. In fact, paid my way through school. I quit bartending, and I would take any job that came to town. I did wardrobe, craft service. I was a location scout. I was a grip. This is back before the unions were so strong. So I could get on a show that came to town as a local and work in whatever department they needed. And it was a really great education for me because I got to work in a lot of different departments and learn about the different crafts, not only lighting, but everything under the sun, really. And that just really helped me steer my direction towards being a cinematographer and a photographer, and kind of took me away from the underwater aspect and the nature aspect, because I kind of had this epiphany that there's a difference between taking pictures and making pictures. And I really wanted to make pictures, and that was bringing all the elements together to create something. And so that's the route I embarked on. There was a photographer, still photographer that I was assisting, that started shooting commercials, mostly car commercials, and was the director cameraman, and then I was his lighting director. So then I naturally started buying lighting gear, and before I knew it, I had a full company and a truck and generators, and was a little bit, tied to that for a while, until I had a chance of paying that off and making money from it. And then I grew as a gaffer in Hollywood, mostly commercial work. I worked with tremendous cinematographers that I learned quite a bit from. Sal Totino, Derek Walsky. There's a couple of director cameramans, camera people. Carolyn Chen was one of them. Yeah, it was a really interesting time. And then as I started to kind of outgrow that position and was really understanding that I felt I could competently be a cinematographer, I got an agent in Canada, which helped me because I could do cinematography jobs in Canada and then gaff and vend jobs here in Los Angeles or wherever in the United States. And there wasn't that much competition. Like sometimes I think when you're moving up and you're working with people and they hear that you're moving up, at least back in the day, they get a little maybe threatened or less supportive. So I was able to kind of miss that for a long time. And then those people like Derek and Sal, they saw that I was growing as a cinematographer. So then they would have me shoot second unit stuff, or I would operate, which I really, really enjoy. I mean, even to this day, I really love operating the camera. I think it's really fun that it becomes an extension of your vision, and also physically. Like I really like handheld work. I like remote heads. I admittedly make noises when I operate as if I'm the camera, like little sound effects, that kind of stuff. And I don't even realize I'm doing it until someone says, shh, I'm like, oh. But yeah, so that was sort of my start. And then I worked in, commercials, mostly in a lot of car commercials, motorcycle stuff. And then I had an opportunity and I was kind of outgrowing that. I wanted to do narrative. I really wanted to tell stories. It's funny, I tease all the time. Like back then, I just want to tell stories. Now I'm like, I'd love a 10-day car commercial. But it's funny. I think the idea is to have some balance, right? Which is really difficult, because you get on these episodics and it's a pretty long run, and you get out of the circles of different producers and directors and companies. And then with COVID, a lot of those companies aren't around anymore.
Right.
But then I got the opportunity to shoot Annabelle for Johnny Leonetti, who was an ASE cinematographer, and one of the nicest humans that ever walked this earth. And so we shot Annabelle, and it was just an amazing experience. I think creatively, storytelling wise, I learned a lot on that show. And that sort of set the tone for me to move mostly into narrative, and mostly into genre, if you will. And that's kind of where I've been the last, I guess I don't know, what year is that? It's been 10 years, maybe a little bit more.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Or less. I can't remember. 2014. So it's coming up. It's 10 years.
What was it like to prepare for shooting Annabelle? What was your relationship like with the director, and what was that experience like for you to prep for that?
It was a really good experience. I mean, like I said, Johnny is one of the nicest guys in the world, and he's very generous with information and ideas. And he's the one that taught me a mantra that I use all the time: is the best idea wins. And so he was very generous. He wasn't closed off to any ideas. He would listen and hear things, and maybe cherry pick a couple of different things from here and there, and then create a new idea. So it was a very supportive, comfortable environment to stretch a little bit and push the boundaries of my experience, really. And then also, I mean, it was a fairly small movie, but it just indoctrinated me into the process of prepping and location scouting and picking locations that could work for numerous scenes or numerous time periods, if you will, and all that stuff. So that whole process was much bigger than I had experienced in the commercial and music video world. And I really, really liked it. I think it was really cool because I love teamwork and I love the team aspect. And that in a narrative project, the team is just much bigger and has a lot more depth, and there's a lot more things to yeah, there's John. There's a lot more things to discuss and plan for, and decisions to make. And I really enjoyed the process. I thought it was very, very rewarding. There were times when I was just itching to shoot and make pictures, but we were scouting and having meetings and, you know, table reads and page turns and that kind of thing. But I realized how important the prep process really is. You know, there's an old adage, you know, proper preparation prevents poor performance. And I think prepping and shooting a film really demonstrates that. You have to have a concise plan going in, and you have to have thought about all the different pitfalls, because no matter how well you plan for it, there's always going to be problems to solve. And if you're not 100% dialed in, it can be daunting when the gears have to shift.
Did you have a lens test for this, or did you have like a specific process that you used for choosing your equipment package for Annabelle?
There weren't as many options then. It was the Arri Alexa Classic. I think it was prior to the Mini, so that was sort of our only real choice, besides some Sony products and Panasonic products that I don't think at the time were as elevated or elegant as the Arri cameras. And then lenses, I played it a little bit safe in that regard. I used Cooke S4s for that show. I had so many great experiences with them. They're very robust, predictable, just a solid lens platform. Plus, there's a million focal lengths available. And you know, they flare pretty well and they resolve really well. And you know, and again, there weren't, I mean, today's market, there is a million lenses out there now. I'm really blown away, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, with the smaller companies that have come up and have offerings now, and also some of the old glass that has been rehoused. And this was still at a time when old glass wasn't nearly as popular yet. And I guess in reality, the Cooke S4s were old glass at the time to some degree. So I chose those because it was safe and I knew them, and it was one less, you know, pitfall for me to learn from. So that was the way I really chose that. And then this is still, you know, this is pre-LED for the most part. There were some LED products, but it was old school tungsten and HMI packages, which was right in my wheelhouse after years of a gaffer and a vendor. And then because the sensitivity was getting so great, I came up in the 100 ASA film days when we used a lot of light, a lot of power, there's a lot of heat. But now, you know, even at 800, we could start to really employ using practicals. And that was a really eye-opener for me in terms of working with the production designer in making some cool decisions about how the sets were dressed and built and incorporating practical lighting. And which is now, I think, pretty standard. You know, we use a lot of practicals for actual light sources, and we set the tone. Even since then, the sensitivities of the cameras have come so far that that's a viable option now. You know, the only problem is we can't really get old school halogen lights and you know, tungsten filaments, and so it's been an adjustment. This is a little bit off topic, but there's been a little bit of adjustment for me with the advent and use and proliferation of all the LED lights.
Right.
You know, they're not quite the same quality, but they're so efficient and so user friendly. I mean, we used to bury pounds and pounds of gels in the ground and throw away all kinds of stuff, and we would have to stop and bring a ladder in and put a scrim in something or change a gel out. And now it's all done either from a dimmer board or remotely on, you know, on someone's phone or iPad. So it's really become way more efficient.
Yeah. Now with another question about Annabelle, because this was based on a true story. Were there any specific references or anything that kind of came up as you were preparing that was inspiring to you? Or
Yeah, as far as you know, that was a movie that John referenced a lot, and that I of course had seen, but really delved back into, was Rosemary's Baby. It was set in that same kind of time frame. You know, it was supposed to be the 70s, which I love period pieces. I love all the wardrobe and the different set deck and the cars. And I feel like it's really rewarding because everything you see on screen has been curated to some degree. And we shot this in Los Angeles, so we were able to shoot in some older neighborhoods that fit that time period. So I would say Rosemary Baby. So I had already seen that movie a couple times, but I really watched it, you know, pretty intensely for look and feel and tone and pacing and that kind of thing. And I think that we definitely paid an homage to that film, and hopefully maybe elevated it a little bit.
yeah.
It's definitely a genre of the time when you go with that one or Race with the Devil or any of the movies of that era. There is a strong look, overall look to what's within the frame.
100%. But as far as like the real story of Annabelle, which is pretty creepy,
Right.
when we actually had the doll built and was on set, it's disturbing. Like I already had, issues with old dolls and things like that. And then on set, it was a presence that you felt. And we did have a couple of interesting circumstances that were unexplained that happened on set. So of course we all adhered to that and thought, oh yeah, this is some sort of, energy that's from the real doll. It's, kind of making some of these things happen. We had a light that was in a existing building, like a flush mounted hallway light that probably been there for 30 years, just out of nowhere fell from the ceiling and missed one of our actors by an inch. And it never explained how that happened, and so I think there's a couple other little things like that as well that were spooky. And that given Halloween is a good time to mention those things. There's some spooky occurrences that happened on set for sure.
Wow. Would you say there was a most memorable scene or shot that you really loved while you were filming that?
We did some really cool stuff, I thought. And sometimes I look back on that film and I really, really am proud of some of the sequences that we shot. There's a bit of action in there. One of the things that we did, the opening of the movie is supposed to be a long oneer between one house and another house where some killers commit a murder on the house next door and then somehow find themselves into the main house. And so we did a oneer through that we steady cammed, and actually we didn't use steady cam. We used Ronin when it first came out, and we wanted to create a look where it was smooth and cinematic, and then right at a certain point it became way more frenetic and energetic. So we made a little bit of a rig where we could lock the Ronin off, and so the stabilizer wouldn't work anymore, and we could give it a handheld feel. And then we used a column between the two houses to do a wipe so that we could reset and pick up from that column. And that way we could do several takes, in the first house, all landing on a little bit of a architectural element that we could then start on and continue into the other house. So that was a fun learning experience for me in terms of really trying to make those things seamless. And I think in the edit, you can't tell it all.
Nice.
There were some other things too. We did a lot of stuff with the demon in the stairwell with lightning strikes, which are super fun. There's a lot of energy in them, and it kind of it's creates a traditional jump scare where you see nothing and then you see a quick flash of light, and you could place things in that scene and then take them away and editorially figure out when the audience sees them and doesn't see them, and is it really there? Is it not there? Is it a figment of my imagination? Is it a figment of the character's imagination? And that was really fun. And Joe Bashara, who's done quite a few creatures, and he's also an amazing sound designer or score. He was the creature himself, and he's a very tall guy, so that the outfit, the wardrobe really was really interesting to see, and it was fun. And one thing else I learned on that was just how important it is to test things. You know, you have ideas, you talk about them, but it's really good to get things on camera. And I'm a huge proponent of that, even if it's just still photography with special effects makeup applications, even down to like paint choices and wallpaper choices and wardrobe choices in that environment. Like it's really important to test and vet all those things. And I think it helps for ease of mind and then your creativity, because you're not solving problems you could have solved early on.
Right. Now another a series we wanted to talk about is the Midnight Club, of course. And in terms of testing, you had all of these different looks that you created for this series. So how did you go about choosing your lenses and cameras for this? Because there's stories within the story.
Yeah, it was a really interesting matrix. First, I had to decide, what the look would be for the show and the A story of the show and how to light photograph that in terms of tone, texture, camera language, all those kind of things. And I felt that this was supposed to feel real world. So I thought the images needed to be believable and realistic yet beautiful. So I started looking at lenses. I wanted a full frame lenses for sure. And I really, really love flare, as you can see. I'm constantly trying to flare the lenses, at the right time and in the right situation. But so after a bit of testing, we used William F. White up in Canada, and they were very, very generous in terms of bringing all their lenses from Toronto and everything else to Vancouver, and let me run through all the lenses a couple different times. So I chose the ZEISS Supreme Radiance for the A story that would be congruent all the way through the series. And it would give us like a sound foundation that was based in reality, had great resolution and sharpness, but also was open to character depending on how you treated them, with T-stops and letting light hit the lens. I'm always trying to figure out ways to get different looks out of different lens sets, and thus far, to me, it comes down to aperture and how light hits the lens. Not only how the lens captures and bends the light, but how ambient or direct light falling on the glass changes the contrast, gives flares, sometimes maybe reveals interesting characteristics. So I felt that the Radiance would also allow me to have different looks in the A story. And then eventually I used those same lenses in some of the B stories, a little bit out of ease, because so for the rest of the episodes, for the B stories, we used a plethora of lenses, all kinds of stuff, anamorphic, master builds. Actually, I have a list right here. It's a pretty crazy lens list. Again, we were very well supported by our vendor, William F. White. But for like block 1 for the B stories, we used, let me just reference this chart here. We used Hawk V-Light anamorphics, including the 45 to 90 V plus zoom. And then in block 2, we used the Light Sumilux C primes. In block 3, we used Vantage 1 T1 primes, which are really cool. In block 4, we used the Masterbuilt soft flare primes. I also carried the Masterbuilt zoom. I think it was a 25 to 100. I really like carrying a zoom for B camera. I think it's important that they have a lot of flexibility in terms of getting different coverage and grabbing shots and tying things together. And especially at this time, this was during COVID, coming on set and making a lens change was just not really a possibility. So I think it's important to have B camera on a zoom where they can make all kinds of adjustments, but it's really hard to find zooms that match whatever lens set you're using. You know, I really like the Canon K35 zoom. It's one of my favorite zoom lenses. And then, you know, the Masterbuilt zoom was able to match almost any other lens that we were using based on, you know, again, how much light hits the glass, the front element, pretty much.
And
So
did you
sometimes it
use
just crack. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sometimes, you know, you just crack the eyebrow a little bit, and it would change the you know, the image a little bit. It would milk it out slightly, or it'd give you a little bit of a flare. And then you could adjust that on the fly to get a different look out of the same lenses. What else? Black 5, we use the ZEISS Master Anamorphics.
Very nice.
The Hawk V-Light Vintage 74. So it was a pretty cool project for me because I had, you know, almost decade of worth of shooting all in one series with different equipment and different glass. I tested it all. I put it through its paces. So I learned a lot, you know, and now, and this is, you know, it's been 2 years since that's done. There's a whole new plethora of lenses out there from, you know, some of the standard manufacturers, but also all these startup companies as well.
One of the questions that's come in from the Q&A kind of leads right into what I was thinking about as well, is with all these different lenses and with all these different setups that you're putting together, do you make a lookbook? And does that help you give you a better visual orientation of the story?
100%. I think it's imperative to create a lookbook and at least pull references so that it's a perfect, you know, point of discussion. Because the way something looks to you in your mind and the way something looks to me in my mind, there's a lot of subjectivity there. But if you actually have a concrete image to show, you know, like this is movie night to me, this is dark, moody night to me, what's it to you? It's like, oh, maybe that's too dark. And so it really gives a hard point to develop the conversation and the approach around for the producers, the directors, even through post, including wardrobe and set deck and production design. Like, hey, how are you gonna light this? What's your approach to it? What's the angle of view? Are we shooting anamorphic? Do we need to make the walls taller if we're shooting, you know, we shot 4:3 for one of the episodes. So all those discussions come into play, and I think having really succinct references to discuss is super important to help narrow down the scope of the approach. So I spent hours searching. And, you know, one thing that I find myself always gravitating towards is like old paintings and classical paintings. Like everything is available to me, from, you know, graphic design and old billboards and, you know, still photography. All that stuff is applicable to pulling references for points of discussion.
With all these,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Tony.
I was just another question that kind of leads into this is, when you're setting all these different looks, is there one go-to you have that you use for jump scares?
That's interesting. I think jump scares to me are a framing and editorial exercise. You know, I don't know necessarily if it's a look or tone kind of application, although I will say that creating dark areas in the frame is always a good lead up to a jump scare. And I think that oftentimes people get more on edge when they can't tell what's going on and when they can't see into the darkness. And you know, oftentimes what's in our own head is a lot scarier than what's actually happening. So if you let the audience have fun with that, and you play with deep shadows and dark parts of the frame, then I think it can set you up for jump scares.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm just showing some dark, moody stuff
Cool.
of yours. But you can see that because it lends itself to, you know, letting the imagination wander, not necessarily bringing the person on the journey, allowing them to feel it for themselves.
Absolutely. And going back a little bit about testing and deciding what equipment to use. So every episode on that show would start the B story pushing along the table where all the kids were hanging out into the fire. So it was really important for me to choose a lens set that could handle that fire, could handle the contrast, and not blow out completely or have, you know, flares that were uncontrollable. You know, I think we've all seen flares with zoom lenses from car headlights, and sometimes the really heavy ping is right over the actor's face, and there's just really no way to adjust it. So I did a lot of testing with fire and with lenses. At the time was during COVID, and there was a restaurant where I was staying down below that had a fireplace, but no customers. I was able to talk them into serving me A, and B, letting me show up every couple of days with a lens set and a DSLR with a PL mount and shoot a bunch of tests of fires. I mean, they had giant fireplaces everywhere. So it was kind of a funny experience, but it really paid off in spades, I think.
Nice.
There's Mike had a question in the chat about how you create a look with a first-time director. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, quite a few times. And also with episodic work, incoming directors, right? And when you're shooting an anthology or something that has a bunch of different periods or locations or storylines, you know, you get to reinvent the wheel every time, which is really, really fun. The variety is amazing. Like, I'm always amazed. You know, people who shot Cheers for 10 years, like the same bar, the same, you know, restaurant, same houses, that to me would become very stale. But doing these projects with a lot of different variation is super refreshing every time. So normally it's having those discussions, pulling references, listening to them, asking them, starting the conversation, well, how did you envision this? And then finding a common language between other films that we all may have seen, and referencing those and kind of pick them apart. You know, I worked with the director on a show called Within. He was an English guy and has an encyclopedic knowledge of film. And we sat and watched every day during prep. We sat and would watch a film or scrub through it, or, you know, find poignant moments that would be applicable to our project and used for inspiration. So it's always a discussion. It's always, I think, open-minded, you know, like there really isn't any wrong answer in our business, which is really fun. You know, I think it's about the collaboration and sharing ideas and finding you know, a process towards a look that we are all on board with, from, like I said, production design and locations, even the director, the producers, and largely post too, you know, getting the dailies colorist on board, even more so than the final colorist, I think, because everybody tends to live with the dailies and they feel that is the essence of the project. And if you deviate from that greatly in like a final grade, I think it shocks people and like, wait, this isn't the movie you wanted to do. I mean, I think conversely it can save you, or you could really change something that wasn't working. But I think it's important to do the best you can to have all the dailies look as if you had intended.
I totally agree, especially now people just are so seem to be so used to that, or looking for that daily affirmation as every time they look at the screen. Thinking about that, you did some really interesting lighting for the movie, The Haunting at Bly Manor, and talking about setups and doing something a little more, something that may be complicated to explain to a director, but you know, you have to bring that out in the lookbooks and all the things we talked about. Tell us a little bit about what your approach was for the lighting for that show.
Well, Haunting of Bly Manor was an interesting experience. I came aboard halfway through the season and took over for another cinematographer. Um, I think it was a good time for the producers and directors to give some notes and what they wanted to see different. So I kind of latched on to some of the things that they wanted to see change, and found new solutions and a new approach to it that worked out really, really well, yet subtle, and didn't really, you know, shift gears too much in the established look of the show halfway through the season. And I did it a little bit slowly through one episode and then the next episode, and it basically meant making things a bit darker. It was beforehand, it was very frontally lit, and so, you know, I just working the keys around and letting some shadow fall off on people's faces. We had employed a rear net, which was really cool, but the producers felt that it was a little too hazy or gauzy. So we just went through and stretched the nets a little bit tighter, and it still had the same effect, but it took the curse off a little bit and diminished it.
No, you can see that. Yeah, I did. You've really taken the lighting away from the front, and allowed the actors to work in the shadows.
I like that. I think it's back to the painting with light thing. I think shadows are really, really important. And it's interesting because everybody's facial structure handles light differently. And it sometimes can be difficult to make one setting or environment look great for everybody. And that's something I struggle with as well, is I tend to want to make everybody look good, even though sometimes with the story points or the character, they're not supposed to. So I'm always constantly second guessing myself, like, oh, maybe we should have some harsh shadows on their eyes, or maybe we should, not diffuse, this close up of this actress or whatever it is. So it's a constant battle with me, is just assessing, what's the best application at the time.
Do you have a favorite episode or shot from that series?
I do. My favorite episode is episode 8. It was a standalone episode. It was kind of had jumped back in time from the 80s, is when the setting was for The Haunting of Bly Manor, but it went to explain the history of the manor. So it went all the way back to like the 1600s. And we shot it in black and white, and had a lot of fun with it. The interesting thing with period pieces is you have to kind of replicate the existing light that would be there. And in this time period, it was window light and candle light and firelight, and that was it. So it's really hard to put a nice big soft key on somebody, because to me it's slightly unexplainable. Like, so we'd have lots of little points of light and candles and things like that. I really like this episode a lot. I think it's the wardrobe and the set design and everything was great. We used a lot of atmosphere. We did a bit of underwater stuff. They had built a lake at this location in Canada, and we shot all through the winter. And so they heated the lake, and we had a lot of steam coming up. I sometimes joked that it was the haunting of Bly Hot Springs. So that was a fun challenge to figure out how to deal with that. We had a techno crane on a barge with a housing or a snorkel lens, and we had some inclement weather that was challenging. One day we showed up and it had snowed like 8 inches, and it was supposed to be spring in the story, and so we brought in steam trucks and melted all the snow, which turned the whole set into a giant mud pit.
Wow.
So it was pretty interesting, but using atmosphere, I really think it's very helpful, especially in the genre. I think it's helpful in ways interior wise to sort of selectively, tastefully take the edge off of some of the sharper digital images. But then outside, I think it lends a really spooky kind of ethereal atmosphere. And having seen the lake full of steam was an inspiration to create more atmosphere around the edges and to use some fans to control that a little bit. Like we'd be like, okay, roll the fans. We blow all the steam off the lake, and then, okay, roll camera. And we would shoot for a while until the steam kind of came back and enveloped it all. And, that's what we do, is problem solve. And I love problem solving with a team. And I think, again, episode 8 is probably visually my favorite. There are some really cool stuff, in the everyday Bly Manor look, but it was episode 8 for sure.
Awesome. It's good that you got to do some underwater too. That's getting back to your roots for that show.
Yeah, I quite like it. I just did another show, ended last year, American Horror Stories, and we had an episode with Alicia Silverstone, and the episode's called The Lake. So inherently there's quite a bit of underwater work. which I just really, really like. And it's fun to take my experience doing underwater and then applying it to modern cinematography and creating a look underwater, and all the blocking that's necessary. And it was really fun. And I think some of that footage is some of my favorite footage, is the underwater from the lake of American Horror Stories.
Do you find you have to stick with wide angle lenses a lot more underwater, or
I
what's
tend to put a zoom in the housing so that we have some flexibility. Yes, normally it's a wide to a medium length zoom. I think you're kind of hamstrung a little bit by the space and how certain lenses move and rack in and out. But I think that taking the housing out and taking the camera out and all that stuff is a really, really time consuming process. So I tend to put a zoom in there for sure. And sometimes compromise a specific look from a set of glass, but have the flexibility from a zoom lens that's pretty clean and less problematic than maybe some other things. Because once you're underwater, you're kind of stuck with what you got.
right? Exactly. Speaking of American Horror Stories, every episode is kind of a different story. How do you prep and block for that? Different than you might have done for some of the other episodics that you've created.
Well, I think again, it's a great opportunity to shift gears and to bring something fresh and new. And it's the variety is really, really fun. Again, it's pulling references and discussing with the incoming director what their vision for the script was. And I think the first part of the conversation, is this surreal? Is this, hyper real? Is it supposed to be rooted in real life so that the audience believes this is really happening? And I think once we kind of decide that, then it opens up the doors to what direction you can go in terms of looks. And then, we don't have as much time on a show like that to sit and watch films, but pulling stills, I spent hours pulling references, and eventually I built a library that I can reference back and forth again. And I find myself gravitating to some of the same images that I use as references all the time, which I think I need to be more careful for. One of those films is Atomic Blonde, which I just think is such a beautifully photographed movie. And all the different light colors and the mixing of colored light together to create a new tone especially on skin. I don't think I've quite gotten there yet, but it's definitely an inspiration for me to keep working in color and on different levels of saturation and all that. But the mix of different colors together and what they create is really, really fascinating and fun. So it's funny, I have this really, really deep appreciation for black and white photography, but I also really gravitate towards bold colors and mixing bold colors together.
Do you find that talking about all of the looks in the dailies and any time that it's up on a video screen, having that all consistent, do you tend to set your LUT prior to the production so that you kind of have a through line look, or is it more like in American Horror Stories where it changes director and episode to episode?
I tend to create a LUT for that episode if it's changing, back and forth. I usually create base LUTs, and I try to keep it simple, because if you start having too many LUTs, it's like, wait, what LUT is this? And we're going to go back and shoot a part of that scene, and what LUT were we on? And so like maybe 2 or 3 at the very, very most in an episode. With the Midnight Club, we had so many different time periods and different looks. It was fun. I had a great DIT up there, and we had a lot of fun creating new looks and LUTs and applying them. And usually that was taking some of the testing. Even I would take stills that I had shot for testing sets and paint and wallpaper and wardrobe, and then putting it into, Photoshop and playing with it a little bit there. And that would be a jumping off point for the DIT to create a LUT. I tend to, especially for the genre things, when there's a lot of nights and darker things, I tend to create a LUT that kind of protects the bottom end a little bit, so that I
Okay.
can, for the most part, light to my eye, but know that, some of those blacks are definitely in there, and pull them out. So it's kind of a fine line, and digital, we expose for our highlights, and in film, we expose for our shadows. So building in, a little bit of protection in the bottom end could affect the high end as well. So it's a little bit of a balance. You can't go too far in my mind, but we have such amazing latitude now in these cameras. It's crazy. Almost too much. It reminds me of the days we used to make prints and then telecine the prints so that there was less room to make adjustments in terms of, you know, color and contrast and overall exposure. So I tend to use LUTs. I've also done projects where I'm just like, all right, we don't have time for that. Let's put the money someplace else other than, you know, DIT and to go back. So I'll have we'll live grade a little bit depending shot to shot, you know, and most of it is about, you know, controlling the tonality, lift the blacks a little bit, crush the highlights a little bit, maybe less contrast if it's a close up or something like that. So constantly riding that, you know, with the DIT. And I think it's fun because it keeps everybody's head in the game as well, between the gaffer and the key grip and the DIT and the camera assistants and myself, to constantly be riding that all the time. But there's other projects I've done where that's not where we want to put the money. So we wouldn't have a DIT, we wouldn't have live grade, we'd have a media manager and just shoot Rec 709 and just treat it like a film stock. You know what Rec 709 looks like, you know its characteristic curves and contrast curves, and just trust in it. And, you know, every once in a while, open up a little bit, just in case.
Right. Leave all the creativity to the hardware rather than the color grade.
Well, and you know, it's like it's a fine line, and you know, you can't pull something out that's underexposed now. It's just, and you know, I just, you know, it's kind of a little bit covering your own butt. You know, like there's nothing worse than the producer is watching the grade, like, oh, you know, I'd really like to see his face some more. You know, that actor we spent a bunch of money on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, there's nothing there, sir. I don't want to be that guy.
Right. Yeah, no, that's never a pleasant conversation, certainly. A quick question came in here. When using atmosphere, especially in the horror genre, would you choose a lens with more contrast to compensate?
No, I think it's about choosing the lenses for the overall look and then adjusting the amount of atmosphere throughout the shoot. It's a really tricky thing. Somebody has to, a special effects person really has to be plugged in and on it to maintain a consistent level of atmosphere. It's a really important job in my mind. Special effects to me is super important in terms of creating images from wet downs to wind to atmosphere to making it rain. I think it's a really, really important ingredient in the recipe of filmmaking that often gets overlooked, I think. And these guys, they come up with all kinds of solutions. They're like MacGyvers, and they're mini engineers, and most of them weld, or their team welds and cutting metal and creating things specific to whatever the shot we're doing or scene we're doing. So it's about, you know, picking the lenses that you want and then adjusting the atmosphere in the space.
Nice. It sounds like you work with you keep a lot of creative people around you when you're on these sets.
That's the idea. Like I'll never be on a softball team anymore. So it's like I love the teamwork aspect. You know, Tuesday night at 6, it's not happening for me. So filmmaking is a team sport for sure. And I love the family atmosphere that develops over the course of a project, and the shorthand that develops. And it's really interesting starting new projects with new crew and things like that. Building that shorthand, building that rapport is just as important as all the prep and the creativity and the discussions as well.
Someone, Duncan, asked in the Q&A about how you choose your projects that you work on. Are there any specific factors that you look at when you're determining if this is something that you want to do?
Yeah, there are, and I think that's grown over time. Is you know, I often ask what's our budget, what are our resources, and are the resources congruent with the script and the demands and the words on the page? You know, because you know it oftentimes you're pressed with money or time or both. So that's my first thing: is this doable for the budget they're talking about? The second thing that I think of is there opportunity to make things dark? Where's all the nights? And then logistics, like where is it going to be set? Where is the crew? Is it where, are we in some jungle in, East Asia, or are we working on stage? I like both, but it definitely changes the mindset and the approach to like, okay, hey, like we're going to be in remote areas. We need to develop a equipment package that is, sustainable and approachable and maybe not that heavy. And then there's other times like, well, we're going to be on stage most of the time. So it's like, you know, heavy lenses, heavy cameras, techno cranes, dollies, that kind of stuff, not running through the woods with a backpack and a handheld camera, which I still really like.
Um, I think let's see, there's a couple last questions popping up in the chat here. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but we only have a few minutes.
That went fast.
Yeah, definitely. There was Anna was asking in the chat in terms of creating a mood for in a horror film for a daylight scene where everything is more visible. You don't have as many shadows to play with. How do you approach that?
Well, that's a really good question. I still think you can create shadows in a daylight scene. I still think you can create contrast in dark areas by the locations you pick, the time of day that you shoot. Also, we use a lot of solids and things like that to take the sun out. Budget permitting, we'll use condors to make fly swatters and take the harsh sun out, and then come in and create the lighting ourselves. So you can make things a little bit more sidey and brighter. And it's funny because a lot of times over the course of my career, oh, it's day exterior, we don't need any lights. And it's like, day exterior, we need really big lights to kind of compete with the sun and the overall ambience. And then, I think one thing to consider too is in those brighter environments in a horror is, makeup applications, rigs for blood and all that kind of stuff are way more evident than they would be in a darker environment. And a lot of times it's tough the makeup artists are amazing, but they blend an application or a cut, and the area around the application can get a little shiny, which to me is a little bit of a giveaway. In darker scenes, it's easier to hide that, of course. In lighter scenes, it can be very difficult, especially if you're not able to control the sun. So you have to have those discussions early on. Hey, this is a daylight scene. What's your application like? These are my experiences. What are yours? Let's do some tests, see where the problems are, solve them before we're on set.
Awesome. Great question from Mike Rossi. As we talk about things moving more digital, what are your thoughts about working on a volume stage, and have you had the opportunity recently to do so?
I have had the opportunity to work on a volume stage, and I really like it. Initially, and I've done years of green screen with, cars and things like that, and we're always dealing with the green spill and having to suppress that and bring solids in. And working in the volume stage is a bit easier. And one of my favorite things about it is using whatever material is on the screens as a light source, and having several panels or a section of panels that rolls around on wheels, and I can actually use it as a key light with the environment, so that the color matches and the differentiation of light matches. Like if you're going down a street, all that matches to the background. And also reflections and things like that in cars. I also think that it's great for directors. We do a lot of stuff in my experience mostly has been driving things and in car things, but process trailers are difficult, and they're noisy and they rattle, and you get to the end of your run and the actors haven't finished their dialogue yet, and you got to start over, and their director's usually directing over a walkie-talkie. But in a volume, the director can lean in the window and give directions and be just out of frame. And so I'm really, really embracing it. I like it a lot. I think the technology is becoming incredible with the nanopixels. My methodology before has always been to have different plates at different focuses. so that you could defocus the background so it felt more natural. Not only using, you know, your aperture for less depth of field, but using background plates that are defocused and have different exposures too, so you can control all that. So I really, really, really like it. You know, now they're having things where the camera is attached to the background and the parallax changes, and you know, you can actually rack back to a volume environment for a story point, you know, where previously, at least from my experience and my approach, I was always trying to blend the background out and, you know, diminish it to some degree. But now the technology allows for us to look right straight at the screens.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, terrific. Well, we have run our hour here. And I do want to thank you, James, for giving us all of your great insight. That's a lot of that. It's a lot of good stuff. And of course, being in the genre of horror, happy Halloween. I hope you guys,
Yeah.
you get out this evening and or at least get some candy. I won't tell anybody about that. But
I love
we plan.
scaring the neighborhood kids, and my daughter is just can't stand me. I'll hide between two cars and jump up and scream. And one year I banged a cookie sheet with a hammer, and my daughter's like, "Oh, Dad, you're..."
She has to tell everybody it's okay. He does this for a living.
Yeah,
So,
right.
awesome. Well, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining our ZEISS conversation today. We have another one coming up soon, usually about one a month. So keep your eye on that newsletter and we'll let you know when it's coming. These replays will be available on our YouTube page at ZEISS Lenses America, and you can contact us directly for a demo at the showroom when you're in LA. Thanks again, James, and thanks everybody for attending. So a happy Halloween to all, and go have a scary evening.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Talk
Thanks
again
for having
soon.
me.